thank you so much for joining us today. I'm letting everyone in from the waiting room. And today we're going to be talking about strategic workforce planning in the age of AI. And I am very excited to have Aisha Ferguson with me. We are really thrilled to be talking to you today about this topic. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so that we can get moving here on the presentation. All right, so today will be a practical guide for HR leaders. So no matter kind of where you're at in your workforce planning, development, strategy, maybe you've started something, maybe you haven't, maybe this isn't something that you've done before, we're gonna make sure that there's something for everyone. I'm Lauren Winans. I'm the CEO and principal HR consultant at Next Level Benefits. I've been in HR for almost 25 years now, and really thrilled to be in a position at this point in my career to be consulting and helping a variety of different organizations through whatever HR projects or issues may come up. And in addition to myself, I have another member of the Next Level Benefits team, Aisha Ferguson. Aisha has over 20 years of HR experience. She's worked in a variety of different industries, and she is a certified practitioner in emotional intelligence, predictive index, and Myers-Briggs. And workforce planning and development is an area that is near and dear to Aisha's heart. and I'm excited to turn over the reins here and give her an opportunity to jump in. But before I do that, just want to share a few housekeeping items, so that you are all aware there is a Q&A area in the webinar where you can enter any sort of questions and answers that you may have. Oh, we're hearing that the audio has an echo from the Q&A section. So I'm sorry about that. I'm not exactly sure how to fix it for you. If that is something that's happening across the board, feel free to let us know. But just from a housekeeping perspective, the Q&A box is there in case you have questions throughout the course of the webinar, but we will be having oh, yes, it's across the board. Oh, someone's saying my audio is fine. Okay, well, we will do our best to mute when we're not speaking, and so that we can kind of get rid of any sort of echo that might be happening. But I very much appreciate your feedback. Thank you. So the Q&A box, where most of you are finding it now, is available for questions. We are going to have a Q&A at the end, so we will likely save most of those questions for the end of the session. As far as this is for one SHRM PDC or HRCI recertification credit. We'll be providing those codes at the end of the session. We will also be emailing those to you, as well as a copy of this recording, and additionally a link to download a skills matrix that may help you with your workforce planning. Lastly, please have your phones ready, because we are going to be having a few polls within our discussion today. And so having your phone available to scan a QR code to enter answers to some of the questions that we have coming up. Hopefully that will be helpful from a participation standpoint to kind of just get a sense of where everyone else is at in this space, and hopefully will add some value to this conversation today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Aisha, who is going to let us know what we're going to focus on today.
Okay, so it seems like when I muted, it helped. So hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Lauren, for that introduction. Over the next 60 minutes, we're going to talk about a lot, and so I'm excited. We're going to cover something that sounds very technical, strategic workforce planning, but it's really not. It's about a fundamental question. Does your organization know what it needs from its people? Where is it falling short? And what do we do about it? So here's how the next 60 minutes are structured. We're first going to start by addressing the elephant in the room, which is AI, because I know it's on everyone's mind. And the subtitle of the webinar today was actually called Cutting Through the Noise, and that's intentional. There's a lot of noise right now about AI, about the future of work, and so we're going to cut through all of it. Then we're going to walk through the three core pillars of strategic workforce planning, which is the current state analysis, forecasting, and gap analysis. And then we'll look at case studies. So Lauren's going to share some case studies with us. And then we'll finish with a roadmap that you can actually use. And then as Lauren talked about, we'll have a Q&A. So we'll try to save all the questions for the end of our discussion. We've tried to make this as interactive as possible. So I'll be asking you to think, reflect, and then there will be a few times where you can actually respond in a poll. And I think the more you participate, the more you'll get out of today's session. So by the end of the session, hopefully you'll be able to answer these three things. Where is your workforce today? Where does it need to be? And what's your first 90-day move? And so if you can answer those three questions, then we've succeeded. So why don't we get into it? We're going to start with where most of our employees are, and that's anxious. And not because they're irrational, but because the signals they're receiving about AI and the future of work are genuinely mixed. And most of them have heard nothing from their own leadership to help make sense of it all. So that's our starting point. So now let's have some real talk about AI and look at the story that the statistics are telling us. So if we focus in on that middle one, 3 in 4 employees believe AI at some point will make their job obsolete. And if we just take a moment with that number, that's not a fringe concern. That's the majority of our workforce walking through the door every morning carrying that weight. And yet, only 1 in 5 of those same employees say that their leadership has told them what the AI plan actually is. Then there's FOBO. So we have a new acronym, fear of becoming obsolete. This is now recognized as a legitimate workforce phenomenon. And it's not just anxiety, but it can be a productivity drain. It can be a retention risk because employees are genuinely concerned. And so if we take a look at the visual, we see all these words that are grayed out. So this is the noise: automation, displacement, layoffs, uncertainty. So these are the words swirling around our employees right now. So in news alerts, social media feeds, conversations, and then going back to that stat, that number at the center, 3 and 4, it tells you that workforce planning isn't just a business strategy exercise, but really it's an act of leadership. So, as HR leaders, when we work with senior leadership to build a deliberate workforce plan and then communicate that to our employees, we're telling them, hey, we see the disruption and we have a strategy. And hopefully that will change a lot for our employees. So, we're going to talk a lot more about that as we go on. And something that we can think about is our organization as a ship navigating through a storm. And many of you have been there before. If you think back to COVID, we literally were having to steer the ship. And some of those words on the slide are the same words that we felt at that time. So those are the waves that we're feeling. So again, workforce planning isn't going to calm the storm, but hopefully today's session will give you a compass and some direction in your goals with workforce planning. And it can also help our employees to not panic so much when they see that leadership knows what they're doing. So now I'm going to ask for a little bit of audience participation. So scan the QR code, please, and then you'll see the poll, the question, and the question is, has your leadership addressed AI concerns?
Thanks, Aisha. So, yep, if you go ahead and bring out your phone, scan that QR code with your camera, and you can go ahead and select your answer. The answers are anonymous, so no worries about that. We'll give everyone here a few seconds to enter their answers. All right. All right. So, I think what's interesting here is Um, a lot of how folks answered today is kind of echoing Aisha's sentiment that she just kind of went over on the previous slide. I mean, I think, leaders are partially addressing concerns. And in, rare cases, there is clear messaging, but there are still, a lot of opportunities for communication because, some organizations aren't really communicating at all as it relates to AI and the concerns that come with that. I'll go ahead and move on for you, Aisha, to the next item here.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of about what I thought would happen with that poll. Well, now let's talk about what the headlines are actually telling us versus what the data says. Because if you've been reading the news, and you might just think that AI is eating up all of our jobs, but the reality is definitely more nuanced. So, starting with that first statistic, only 4.5% of 1.2 million job cuts in 2025 actually cited AI as the reason. Second, about 80% of AI projects fail before they scale. So, even when organizations are trying to automate, they're mostly struggling to make it work, which is interesting. Forrester projects that only 6% of US jobs will be automated by 2030. And then the World Economic Forum projects 170 million new jobs emerging over the same period. So here's just a reflection question. Before I showed you these numbers, what percentage of 2025 job cuts did you think were actually attributed to AI? And so be honest with yourself. And so the gap between your answer and that 4.5% is exactly the gap that our employees are living in. So I think the bottom line or the takeaway for us is that the situation is more manageable than it might appear. We can't afford to ignore AI, but we have to plan for it intelligently. So, what are we going to do? We're going to do our strategic workforce planning. And as I mentioned earlier, it sounds a lot scarier than it is, but it really boils down to those three questions. Who do we have? What skills? What capabilities? Where's the readiness? It's really an honest evaluation of our current people. Number two, who do we need? Not just next quarter, but over the next 36 months. And also, who do we need aligned to where the business is actually going? We're going to talk a little bit about that, some different scenarios of business growth. And finally, how do we close the gap between these two realities? And really, that's the whole thing. And if you notice, we didn't say anything about head count spreadsheets or org charts. A lot of times that's what we used to think when we would talk about strategic workforce planning. But this isn't just about counting people. It's really about aligning the capabilities within our organization to the business strategy. And so that's a totally different conversation. And I think what's exciting about today's webinar is that we have a variety of people here. We have people who are just starting in their HR career, mid-level, and very senior professionals. So hopefully, the way we've framed things today, each of these different places at where you might be in your career, you'll benefit from some of the things that we're going to talk about. And to use a metaphor about strategic workforce planning, we can think about baking a cake. Most organizations are very good at gathering the ingredients, so they have the people, the processes, systems in place, but they haven't read the recipe. So sometimes we don't know what we're trying to make in what proportions. And so the strategic workforce plan, that really is our recipe of how to move forward. And then we'll just take a quick look at that bottom statistic if we go back, where it says that only 15% of companies actively practice strategic workforce planning. So most of our competitors aren't doing this. So if we start, it can be likened to we're actually pulling ahead of our competitors. So now we'll move into what that first part of the current state analysis is. And the tagline for this section is you cannot plan where you're going until you know where you are. So, conducting a current state analysis, this is where we stop looking at the external world and really start looking inward. And I want to acknowledge this part sometimes makes people a little bit uncomfortable because you have to like lift up the hood of a car, and sometimes what we see maybe isn't what we want to see. So taking an honest inventory of our workforce means confronting those gaps, the risks, blind spots, maybe things that we haven't addressed before. And so that's exactly why, some organizations might skip this, but we're not going to skip it. We're going to walk you through how to do this. So, what are we assessing? We have five different areas that we're going to talk about. And so, when we look at the skills inventory, again, we're not looking at job titles, but we're looking at actual capabilities. And you all know the fact that someone's title is manager doesn't tell you whether they can really run a project. Can they lead their employees through conflict? Or do they have the ability to use some of the new data tools that you might have recently purchased? Skills inventory means what are the observable, verifiable capabilities on our team? Who can actually do what? And so, as Lauren mentioned, we're actually going to provide you with the skills matrix template that we use. So we hope you'll find that really beneficial. The second area is succession readiness. So maybe you can think about it this way. What are the top 10 critical roles in your company? Who is the backup for that position? Who could step in tomorrow? Who might be ready in 6 months? And if the answer is nobody, then again, this is a conversation that we need to be having with leadership. The third area is demographic analysis. So, looking at retirement risk, flight risk, tenure concentration, and then finally, performance and potential and role criticality. Those round out the picture. So, together, all five of these lenses give us a true picture of what we're working with. Again, not the picture that our org chart might tell us, but the real one. So, just another quick reflection. Think about your organization and think earlier I mentioned the top 10 critical roles. So, maybe think about 5 to 10 critical roles in your organization. Not the most senior, but the most critical. So, the ones that if they became vacant tomorrow, your company would feel it immediately. And then again, ask yourself if that person left today, what would you do? So you might be actually taking notes. So if you don't know the answer to that, maybe write that down. And maybe that department might be your starting point for doing this current state analysis. And then just want to point your attention to the illustration on the right because that's intentional. Workforce planning is a team activity. HR director can't do it alone. So it's best done when you have a small working group who can challenge each other and also look for those blind spots together. So now that we know where we are, let's talk about where we're going. So most organizations get this part wrong, not because they can't predict the future. None of us can do that but because they only plan for one future. Um, and so we can look at three different scenarios to talk about where our company might be headed. So we're going to talk about a base case, growth, and contraction. So base case is where most of us start our planning with, and really it's the one that most of us only plan for. So that's, business continues on its current trajectory. We're going to maintain our current talent strategy. We're just going to focus on stability and retention. But what if you're in a company that's planning for growth? So maybe you're planning for expansion. You're maybe thinking of expanding into new markets. Maybe there's a merger that's going to be happening. These are things that are going to affect your workforce planning. That will mean rapid hiring and rapid capacity building. Maybe there's a high L&D investment to bring people up to speed. And then finally, most of us don't want to plan for contraction, but it's something that we need to think about as the economy shifts, or maybe there's a restructuring that happens. Maybe we lose a contract, which required skills would require redeployment over hiring. So these are when you're doing your workforce planning, you want to make sure that you keep these scenarios in mind. And so, another question that you might want to ask your leadership team is, are we planning our workforce for the business we have today, the business we want in 3 years, or the business we might be forced to become? So, again, you're working with your leadership, you're doing this in partnership with one another. Now, we are going to talk about the gap analysis. So we've diagnosed the current state, you've projected the future state, and now comes the truth. What is the gap? What's the delta? So a gap analysis is where the current state meets the future state. And it really is the most actionable part of this whole process because it tells you specifically what to do about what you found out. So now we're going to look at these four gaps. So, skills gaps are about capabilities that you need, but you don't have them yet. And so, we talked a lot earlier about AI. And so, AI literacy, this is a classic example right now. You might have, 50 brilliant employees, but none of them have been trained to work along AI tools. And so, that would be a skills gap. Volume gaps are headcount shortfalls. So let's say you need 10 project managers to get the work done and you only have 6. So that's pretty easy to recognize. Quality gaps are a little bit trickier because these are roles that are filled but not at the level you need. So the person is there, but the performance isn't where it needs to be. And then there are timing gaps. And this can be the most dangerous and the least addressed. So you have the right person, but they won't be ready when you need them. So you can think of an incoming employee is maybe 18 months from readiness, but the critical leader is going to be retiring in 6 months. So that's a timing gap. And that requires a different intervention than the other three. And we're going to talk about some different types of interventions. And we can do that now. We're going to talk about this framework. And again, as we talked earlier, many of you might have been doing strategic workforce planning for some time, but maybe only one way. So now we're trying to give you a new vocabulary, some language that you can use when you're talking with your senior leaders. So it's a simple framework that can help you as you plan. And once you've identified your gap and its type, you can use any one of these four levers to pull, and you might use them in conjunction with one another. So, for example, building, that is developing internal talent. We're hearing a lot of upskilling, reskilling. You might use stretch assignments. The second one is buy. And we're probably the most familiar with that. We're bringing in external talent when the gap is too wide. We're hiring someone outside of the organization. The third one is to borrow. So this is when you might bring in someone for a short term, limited time. Maybe it's a contractor, a fractional talent. An example could be, your benefits manager is going on a 12-week leave, parental leave. So you contract with a fractional HR consultant who specializes in benefits administration, who can help handle open enrollment, respond to employee benefits questions, and manage, the relationships, carrier relationships. And then when your benefits manager returns, the contractor exits. Um, Bridge, they can be similar, but really the bridge is an interim solution that buys you time while a permanent approach is being built. So maybe you use this in conjunction with building. So let's say you have an HR coordinator who you want to grow into a HRIS analyst role. So your HR coordinator, primarily they've been doing administrative work, filing, scheduling interviews, processing paperwork, but now those tasks are increasingly becoming automated. So rather than eliminate the role, you're going to build that person. So you're investing maybe 6 months training them in reporting, data analytics, However, during that time, maybe you need an outside consultant to come in once a week to handle the reporting while the HR coordinator comes up to speed. So, again, that's a case where you're using a combination of build and bridge. Um, the most common mistake or the most common thing that we see organizations doing is, hey, we need another body. So we're just going to hire someone. But that sometimes can be the slowest, most expensive option. So again, sometimes build plus bridge gets you there faster and it builds internal capability along the way. So this framework is asking you which lever is actually right for the specific gap. And so you can think of this as building an all-star team. I don't know how many of you all have been watching March Madness, but you don't only want to, sign your free agents, but we're also developing the players on the bench, bringing in temporary contractors for maybe a specific project, using the veterans on the team to mentor the newer employees until they're ready. And so great teams, great organizations usually use all four of these different strategies. And we want to keep in mind that last stat at the bottom, 88% of employees cite L&D as a top retention factor. So closing skills gaps isn't just about business continuity, but it can be a very powerful retention tool. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, who's going to give us some practical examples of how workforce planning can look in different organizations and how we've been able to assist some of our clients.
Thanks, Aisha. Yeah, we've got 4 examples for you today. These are real life examples. These are clients that we have worked with in the past for a variety of different reasons and different projects that have come up. But specifically, when we've engaged with them in a workforce planning capacity, I wanted to kind of share a little bit here in terms of challenge, solution, and outcome. So, of course, between the challenge and the solution, there is a lot of work and a lot of effort that needs to take place. So I'm absolutely oversimplifying each one of these cases, but just in the interest of time and just kind of sharing and getting your thoughts going in terms of maybe how you can apply some of what we're talking about today to your own organization. I thought these 4 were the best ones to kind of illustrate what Aisha's been speaking about as it relates to build, buy, borrow, and bridge. So case study number 1, really the overall issue was a staffing shortage. We were engaged at the time with a healthcare system who was facing a nursing shortage. And in addition to that shortage, there was naturally residual burnout from the pandemic, and just really a lot of struggles that were resulting in an impact to patients. And so we ended up working with that client to really help them implement some predictive workforce planning that would really help them to leverage their existing data that they had related to their patients, like volume, and just really kind of understanding at what point do we see that we need the most out of our staff versus at what point do we not. They were really kind of using a lot of assumptions and not necessarily the data that they had at hand. So we were really focused on taking the data itself and operationalizing that. So we also, in addition to taking a look at what are our peak times throughout the day, the week, the month, but we were also, taking a closer look at flexible staffing models and really kind of, finding out what would work best for that type of environment. And so ultimately, over time, the outcome was reduced vacancy rates and improved patient satisfaction scores. And, if you can think about your organization in this capacity, right? Challenge, a solution that you're going to find the answers for, right? That's kind of what we're talking about today. But then being able to also kind of measure the outcome in a measurable, a valuable measure that could be helpful to really identify, okay, did we succeed in developing the solution that really truly solved our challenge, or at least improved upon our challenge? Case study two was, we were working with the manufacturing firm. They were really struggling as they were trying to repurpose different roles as they were enhancing some of their technology, within the plant, and they really needed to kind of, widen some skills and really kind of improve, kind of on the gaps that are ultimately there when you're in a situation where you're ultimately making changes, but you're needing folks who maybe have done the same job for a very long time. You need to ultimately help them kind of get to a place where they're able to feel more confident and more valuable and able to elevate their roles and responsibilities. And so it was very important to this organization to ensure that they were minimizing any sort of layoff impact. So it was really about identifying the skills gap that occurred as they were bringing in more technology and automating some of their processes. And so, we helped that organization launch a workforce planning initiative, and we spent a lot of time mapping out skills and developing upskilling programs. Working with some external partners to identify certifications and different tracks from a learning perspective that might be helpful. And ultimately, the outcome there was increased internal fill rates, as well as reducing some of the external hiring costs. So we were able to kind of avoid mass layoffs through taking the existing staff, identifying where some of those skill gaps may lie, and really helping the employees by developing a learning and development program that would really not only benefit them but also benefit the organization. Case study three, rapid scaling. It was an organization we were working with in the high tech field, who ultimately, when you're a startup and you're kind of getting going, you don't always have the infrastructure in place or the framework. And so they really lacked, really an org design and much of a workforce plan at all. So it really kind of led to this inconsistent hiring practices that really created some issues as they started to expand rapidly. So we helped them to kind of build that workforce planning framework, really keeping in mind their revenue forecasts and what those targets were looking like, so that we weren't accelerating too fast or too slow based upon how the organization was growing. And so the outcome there was, that improved hiring efficiency, and really becoming, much more intentional in their decision making when it came to hiring in new talent. And the last case study here, the solve was for high turnover. And so we were working with a retailer who, just really any retailer in the space does experience quite a bit of turnover, a lot of unpredictability, and labor costs can shift pretty significantly, pretty quickly. And so, unless you've got your hands around it, it can really impact, the operations as well as the profitability of the organization. So we helped really kind of focus on demand-based scheduling and really measuring analytics in a way that was really going to be helpful in terms of retaining employees, as opposed to allowing the high turnover to continue to kind of be controlling the environment and controlling the operations. We also took a closer look at the compensation structure and really tried to focus on tying comp to tenure as well as performance, and the outcome there was decreased turnover by 20%, which is pretty large for a retail organization. I mean, their turnover rates are, sometimes over 100%, if you can believe that, where the same role is getting turned over more than once during a 12-month period. And so just being able to decrease turnover by 20% was a huge win. We're able to stabilize some of those labor costs and really kind of, improve that profitability at the store level. So, these case studies here are meant to be examples to really kind of stretch your brain around, okay, in my own organization, should I be focused maybe more so on borrowing, like case study one? Or should I be maybe focused on building, like case study two, and maybe case study three, maybe we do need to buy a little bit. We need to accelerate by adding headcount. And then case study four, that focus on, really the kind of the focus and the lens that project took was really on a bridge. What can we do to stop the bleeding while we come up with a longer term solution? And so, there's going to be times in your organization where you may be experiencing one, but there's also going to be times where you're going to experience more of these, and you're going to need to draw upon, these different tactics and be versatile and able to shift quickly as these different situations may present themselves. And hopefully these examples were helpful to you. Certainly, just as a reminder before I hand it back over to Aisha, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. We are going to have a Q&A session towards the end of the time here, and would be happy to answer any questions that you have related to these specific examples or anything that Aisha is sharing today.
Thank you, Lauren. Those were great examples, and I think it helps people to kind of wrap their idea around strategic workforce planning, especially if they haven't engaged in it before. And so some of you might be thinking, this is a lot. I'm only one person, or we have a small team. We don't have, a dedicated workforce planning function. Our data is not perfect. And we hear all of those concerns. But what we want to tell you is you don't need any of that to start. You can start with a simple pilot program. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and the benefits of a pilot. A pilot can give you four things that a full enterprise rollout can't. So, one, it's lower risk. You're focusing in on one department. So, if something doesn't work, you use it as a learning experience, not as a company wide organization failure. You can have faster wins. If you pilot this in one department, you can show results in 60 to 90 days rather than waiting maybe for 12 to 18 months for an enterprise implementation. It's your proof of concept. So if the pilot succeeds, you have a real story to tell with your leadership team. And then also, it's a learning opportunity. So you figure what works in your specific culture before committing it everywhere. And so maybe the question I want to ask you right now is, if you were going to start a workforce planning pilot this month, which one department would you choose? So you might want to think about where do you have the most visibility, or maybe the most supportive manager, or the most pressing workforce question to answer. What's the department that has the highest turnover? Maybe start there. And so now we're going to get into the strategic roadmap. So as we go through the next sections, I want you to be thinking again about that one department that you thought you would choose for your pilot. And keep in mind, we've talked about the why, we've talked through the what, the current state analysis, the future state, the gap analysis. So now we're going to talk about how. Specifically, what does the first 12 months look like for an organization that's serious about it? And so you can see on this illustration how the road, it winds, it backtracks, it asks you to maybe slow down, maybe make a U-turn, and that's okay because progress in workforce planning is rarely a straight line. But we have to be on the road in the first place. So let's talk about each of the phases. Phase one is your foundation. So let's use the pilot as an example, and let's say you start in the HR department, which actually might be an ideal starting point because you understand the work, you control the data, and a win here would give you an internal model that you can replicate everywhere else in the company. So in phase one, your first move would be a skills inventory of the HR team. So remember, we talked earlier about not just job titles, but what are the actual capabilities? Who on your team has deep HRIS proficiency? Who has experience with compensation benchmarking? Who can run a meaningful L&D program versus who coordinates logistics? And so you're going to probably find that maybe three or four people have skills that aren't being used at all, and maybe two or three have capability gaps that nobody's really mentioned. Or, like we said earlier, maybe you're the one trying to do all of these things. So the next thing you want to do is identify your 5 to 10 most critical roles within HR. And so, in most HR teams, if you have a sizable organization, that might be the HR director, the HR BPs, talent acquisition specialist, maybe an HRIS administrator. And for each one, you want to ask yourself, if this person left tomorrow, what's our plan? By the end of month 3, so we're still in phase 1, you have a current state report, which has your skills matrix and baseline metrics. And so some of those metrics that you might be capturing are, what's our current vacancy rate within HR? What's the time to fill for our HR roles? What's our turnover rate over the last 12 months? And so this report, you're going to be able to present this to leadership, and it's going to say what our HR team can actually do. Here's where the exposure lies, and here are the 3 most urgent risks. Now let's look at phase 2. So we take that current state picture and we're going to run it forward. So, for example, let's say our organization is planning to grow from 400 to 650 employees over the next 3 years. What does that mean for the HR team? So, you probably are going to need to hire 2 additional HR BPs. So, that would be a volume gap that we talked about earlier. Maybe your current HRIS was built for a smaller company, and so your team won't have the analytical skills to run a more powerful system. So that's a skill gap. Then maybe you find out that your HR director is planning to transition in about 18 months, and that the most likely internal successor won't be ready for another year. So that's a timing gap. So again, putting all of this down in your report, now you have something to work with. So by the end of phase 2, you have a workforce strategy for the HR function and a prioritized gap scorecard. And so when you bring that to the executive team, you're getting their buy-in to believe in the workforce planning as a concept, as a part of a regular cadence of meeting with them. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Also, you're showing them the math. Like, here's what we need, here's what we have, and here's what it's going to cost us to close the gap. And here's what it costs if we don't do anything at all. So, phase 3, this is the opportunity where you can take that model that you built in HR and run it in maybe 2 or 3 additional departments. So maybe in your organization, a natural sequence would be to go to the department with the most pressing workforce risk. Maybe it's finance, because 2 senior people are within 3 years of retirement and there's no succession plan. Or, as we mentioned earlier, maybe it's in your highest turnover department, because the cost of turnover is something that's bubbling up. Leadership is becoming concerned. So maybe you start there. The second thing is integration. So you're no longer doing workforce planning as a separate initiative that runs alongside business planning, but you're embedding it into the annual cycle. So when your CFO is building the budget for the next year, they're coming to you for that gap scorecard. When the COO is planning for maybe a new service line, they're coming to you. Do we have the capability to staff this, or do we need to build, buy, borrow, build? So you're using that language, you're getting others to use that language in your organization. And there's a shift that happens. You're no longer being reactive, but you're being proactive. And finally, you want to make sure that you're having regular, perhaps quarterly reviews, where you present a workforce health update to leadership. Here's the state of our critical roles. Here's what our succession pipeline looks like. So you're now tracking whether the organization is building the capacity to kind of execute that strategy. Remember, we talked about those 3 different scenarios, whether we're going to be in a base scenario, growth, or retraction. And then the deliverable at the end is an enterprise workforce planning playbook. So that's going to take some time to get there, but hopefully that's the goal. So here's another self reflection question. where on this roadmap is your organization right now? And if the answer is we're not on the road yet, that's okay. That's probably where many of us are on the call today. But today, hopefully, you can leave with an actual starting point. Okay. So now, again, we wanted to give you some key takeaways by experience level because we know that many people, again, are at different places in their career. So we wanted to give you a moment that's specifically, tailored to where you are. So we'll walk through these two columns. If you're new to workforce planning, the most important thing that we can tell you is to start small and don't worry if things aren't perfect. Start a skills inventory in one department this week. Don't wait for the data to be perfect. You'll be waiting forever. And then maybe find one executive ally and frame it as, we want to have a conversation. I want to have a conversation with you about some of our business risks. And then commit to phase one within 90 days. So that's your action plan. On the other hand, if you're an experienced HR leader, your opportunity is different. You might have a lot of this knowledge in your mind, but maybe your goal is that the knowledge lives in your head, so you want to formalize it. So you can apply the four gap types to what you already know. You can maybe start right away with introducing that buy, build, borrow, bridge framework in your next leadership meeting. And then identify your organization's single biggest workforce risk. Maybe you don't start with HR, but you jump right in to select the department with the biggest turnover, and that becomes the anchor of your roadmap. So, we started this session today talking about a lot of noise, the headlines, workforce anxiety, the fear of falling behind. And we hope that you're leaving today with a little bit less noise and more clarity. And just keep in mind, there are three questions that you want to ask yourself. Who do we have? Who do we need? And how do we close the gap? We talked about a four-part framework, the four Bs, a phased roadmap, and a skills matrix template that we're going to provide to you. So we hope you'll get started on this right away. And so now, again, some more time to do some reflection. We're going to pull up a poll. And before we wrap up the discussion, we wanted to ask you, in one or two words, what is the biggest AI concern facing your organization right now? So just give us a chance to kind of reflect on what we've talked about today.
Remember, your answers are anonymous, so feel free to scan the QR code and enter a word or two, and the word cloud will emerge, and we'll get to see maybe what's some of the most common concerns amongst everyone here who is together live today. Yeah, confidentiality is a big one. Credibility, security. Yeah, I think, a lot of these concerns are echoed not only amongst all of us within the HR function, but also amongst our employees. And so, I think to echo what Aisha had mentioned, earlier, communication in this topic is, definitely worth taking the investment of really thinking about, how should we communicate AI, about AI and the concerns around AI, within our organization to help employees understand kind of where we're at on our trajectory or how, we're approaching it. Of course, this is a leadership conversation internally about how you want to present that to employees, but the same concerns that you have, your employees have as well. And the best way to kind of get over some of these fears and these anxieties is really to kind of meet it head on with transparent communication, and really, a good understanding of, the fact that, as you've learned today, AI is not going to be replacing all of our jobs tomorrow. It's incredibly important to leverage AI in a way that makes sense for your organization and not fully ignore it, but at the same time, we don't need to fear it. But I agree, as confidentiality is the number one word on the word cloud today. There are a lot of concerns around privacy, security, bias. And I think that those are things that, again, that your employees are thinking about and that your leaders are thinking about. So, being a good steward within the HR function of making sure that, we can step in and help to dispel some concerns, but also come up with some plans of how we can support the organization through, another crazy change that, we get thrown into. Is certainly a way for us to be valuable to our organizations. Aisha, before I move on to our next poll, our last poll question, is there anything that surprises you about any of these concerns that have been brought up today?
No, maybe I would have thought the word fear, but I guess that's covered by job uncertainty.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
agreed.
somebody said too heavy. Um, so yeah, I think all of these words are things that we're all thinking and we're all learning, because AI keeps changing and we keep hearing different things. So
Sure.
now the next question is, again, looking internally, where is workforce planning within your organization? So, would you say it's reactive, developing, structured, or strategic? And so I am very interested in seeing the answers to this one.
Yeah. This is going to be helpful for us because, when you decide to talk about, a topic like workforce planning, you just don't know where everyone's at, on the spectrum. You can make some assumptions, but it's always helpful for us to know kind of, where you're at. Hopefully you feel, regardless of where you're at, on the workforce planning spectrum, you feel like you are equipped to walk away today with more insights than you had, before you joined us. But yeah, seeing that reactive is, top answer here is definitely not surprising. I think that, even when you're trying to make the best effort to be more strategic and have the planning mindset in place, without the proper framework and the proper structure and having that more ingrained in the organization, it's hard to get out of that reactive state, for sure. All right. So we're going to go ahead and take some questions. If you have a question, please enter it into the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you. While we're giving everyone a moment to think about a question, maybe enter that question. I did want to address some of the questions that are in here as it relates to content and recordings and whatnot. We will definitely be providing you with a link to the recording for today's webinar, as well as a link to download the Skills Gap template, should you wish to do that. We will not be sharing the slides. However, if there is something specific that you would like to ask questions about or have a dialogue about, Aisha and I are more than willing to have that conversation with you. And you can absolutely, reach out to us. On the next slide, I'll be providing a QR code where you can reach out to me directly, and I can help coordinate and connect you with Aisha and or myself. We're happy to talk through anything that may have sparked some brainstorming that you might want to, have some time with us. We're happy to talk through that. But yes, the recording and the download will be shared. And before I take a look again at what we've got in the questions, I do want to share here the professional development credits. So we've got the activity ID for SHRM, the program ID for HRCI. I'll leave that up right now while I take a look to see if we've got any questions. I know that we had some comments related to some of the case studies that we discussed, and as well as a comment related to the use of the HR department for the pilot, which was, love that example. And, I think that is definitely a place where you can, if you're struggling in determining which area of the organization to start with, HR is a really great one, particularly if you've got some buy-in with some of your colleagues, assuming you have a team that is more than just a team of one. It certainly can help if you are all on the same page of wanting to kind of do this and do this together, and then eventually roll it out to other functions within the organization. Aisha, I know that you had some specific questions that we may have received prior. I don't know if you want to throw one of those out there, and we can answer that before we let everyone go for the day.
Sure. I think we addressed some of it. A lot of people say, "Where do I begin?" Or what happens if we're trying to have this conversation with leadership? How do we get them on board?
Mm-hmm.
So that was one thing that I was thinking about.
Yeah.
And so one thing I would say to that is start with the data that you already have. And a lot of times when you have small departments, maybe you're not focused on the data, but that's where I really feel that as HR professionals, we can hone our skills. So most of us have an HRIS. Use those metrics, use the data that you already have to tell the story to leadership and explain why this is so important, why we need to get started on this. And if you're a department of one, maybe that's it, explaining to them, hey, there's so many initiatives that we need to be working on, and we need more people in the HR department. And here's why. But you have to show them the data to tell that story. Um,
Yeah, I completely agree, Aisha. I think the thing I would echo is, leaders, when you are looking to get them on board and understand, the purpose here, and they do respond much better to understanding the risk than the reward. And so, even just by virtue of explaining, hey, if we don't do this, or if we don't start having these conversations, if we don't start a pilot within a particular function, we are going to be in a place where we are not going to be prepared for growth. We're not going to be prepared for, when something comes down the pike, like economic uncertainty or tariffs, or whatever the case may be. It's important to kind of illustrate the why, but also like what will happen if we don't do this. And I think that often moves the needle, particularly with executive leadership, to really help to buy into this exercise, because this exercise is incredibly important. And you could explain it till you're blue in the face, but if you don't share what happens if it doesn't happen, I think that you might not necessarily get the buy-in as easily as you could if you do share kind of what your thoughts are as it relates to, if this person leaves tomorrow, what will happen if we aren't taking a look at how we are staffing this particular function, what will happen. So it's just important to think in that context and in that framework when you're presenting this information.
that's a
So I
great point.
just want to thank Aisha. I mean, we've got about a minute or so here left. If anyone, if any of you on the call today have any questions, if anyone who's listening to the recording, if you have any questions at all, and you would rather ask those questions directly to us, you can see that our email address is at the bottom of the screen here. Scanning the QR code gives you an opportunity to reach out to me to either schedule some time or send a quick note. So we are here to answer any questions for you that you may have. Also too, we'll be sending out the recording and the download as we mentioned previously. So feel free to reply off of that if you have any specific questions. Happy to respond to you, and very much appreciate your time today. Thank you, Aisha, for some great content, and we hope that this was helpful and valuable to all of you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.